Sorry, I just woke up. Part 1. Reality inside Deltarune. In Deltarune, chapters 3 and 4, an interesting question is posed by Ralsei. When the fun gang sees Ralsei's room, it's depressing and empty, because Ralsei doesn't feel like he, as a Darkner, deserves a room. He doesn't consider himself alive on the same level as Susie and Chris are. What is most upsetting about this admission from him is that in some ways, he is correct. All Darkners are, in the light world, inanimate objects. If that is true, then without a dark fountain, they remain inanimate objects. The truth is more complicated than that, but this is something the player might have already thought of before now. It brings up a certain cognitive dissonance. Ralsei isn't real, but we still care about him, both as players and the characters, as Susie and Chris. Which brings me to the question of the day. In Deltarune, is Ralsei real? First, let's define real.
You look at trees and label them just so, for trees are trees and growing is to grow. You walk the earth and tread with solemn pace, one of the many minor globes of space. A star's a star, some matter in a ball, compelled to courses mathematical, amid the regimented cold inane where destined atoms are each moment slain. At bidding of a will to which we bend, and must but only dimly apprehend, great processes march on as time unrolls from dark beginnings to uncertain goals, and as on page o'erwritten without clue, with script and limning packed of various hue, an endless multitude of forms appear, some grim, some frail, some beautiful, some queer, each alien except as kin from one, remote origo, gnat, man, stone, and sun.
First, is he real in that he exists? Yes, obviously. Even if he exists only as a character to Chris and Susie, as a character, he is real. Second, is he real in that he is alive and animate? Yes, but only sometimes. More on this later. Third, is he real in that he is conscious? This is by far the most difficult question and will require a lot of discussion. Does he exist? When I say Ralsei exists, this puts him on the same level as, say, Superman. Superman is a character, and Ralsei is at least a character, in that he has traits and features, and people know who you are referring to when you say their names. He is real in that he is conceptual, which is self-evident and not interesting. Moving on. Is he alive? When I say alive, what do I mean? Not alive in a formal biological sense, I mean alive in a more general sense. Is Ralsei animate? In other words, he can talk, run around, communicate, and has intelligence. So if we assume that Ralsei, like other Darkners, is a being created from an inanimate object, or even possibly the remains of a monster like Gerson, the answer is that he is alive sometimes. Ralsei can only exist inside of the Dark World, but the Dark World is not his entire reality. For instance, Chris can move Lancer and Rules around in the real world, where they later reappear in Dark Worlds as themselves. Ergo, they have a living phase and an inert phase. I don't believe that being conditionally alive means that you aren't truly alive. For example, humans have to sleep 8 hours a day. In that way, we have an inert phase too, but at the same time, we can be awoken from this state easily, and Darkners cannot. Darkners also seem to have some very limited perception in the light world. In this way, I think Ralsei is being unfair to himself. He is alive. Even if it's not all the time, he's a real person with feelings and dreams. I do think if we accept he is alive, this invites new complications, such as the fact that if Ralsei is alive and the Fun Gang are trying to close dark fountains, then ultimately the gang's goal, in a very real sense, is to kill all Darkners. Is he conscious? To be clear, what I'm asking is if Ralsei is conscious in the context of the game world. Obviously, he's not conscious in the real world. More on that later, actually. This is an incredibly complex question, and before I answer it, there must be a great deal of explanation given to what consciousness is. Let's start with a baseline. We know that we are conscious. We take it for granted. It is the baseline experience required to, well, experience anything. Let's take for granted that we are conscious. How then do we know other beings are conscious? From the fact that we are humans, we can assume that other humans are conscious. We might be able to assume that a cat is conscious in some way, because they have behaviors that are comprehensible to us. But what about, say, a fly? What about a tree? They're alive, but they're much simpler and more alien to us. How can we tell if these things are conscious? Furthermore, we can assume another human is conscious, but how can we prove that? Scientifically speaking, it doesn't actually seem like a safe assumption at all. After all, we can't see the consciousness of another person. We can't see the consciousness of a cat. We can't hear, taste, smell, or even observe it using instruments. Some of you may be thinking about brain scanning devices such as MRI and CT scans that can observe the functions of the brain. But brain activity is a completely separate matter to being conscious. Before I continue, I want to put a fine point on that. There are a great many people who assume that brain activity or mental complexity is the same phenomenon as consciousness, but this is not true in the least. Even if we mapped every neuron in the mind and all of its functions, we would not discover consciousness, which is a fundamentally different question than the physical and chemical processes of the human mind. As an example of what I mean, let's discuss the philosophical zombie thought experiment. Let's say that you clone yourself, creating a one-to-one replica of your body, the same cells, the same neurons, a completely identical copy with one difference. The copy does not have consciousness. If you show the zombie a red ball, it will say the word red, but it will not see red. If you poke the zombie, it will cry out in pain, but it will not feel pain. It is the same physical being without consciousness. Physically speaking, how does that being change at all? Is it lighter? Does it act differently? Is it a different person? No, it is the same being. In this way, we can demonstrate how consciousness is so elusive. It has no scent, it has no weight, no sense whatsoever, and yet it must exist. Unless you'd like to argue that consciousness does not exist, and humans are strictly mechanical, in which case you might be the philosophical zombie. It has been demonstrated that consciousness has no weight or scent or taste, so it might seem to be impossible to pin down, impossible to even comprehend, but this is not the case at all. There are other concepts in science that are invisible in this way, such as, for instance, gravity, magnetism. There are other ways to measure these phenomena. It is just that we have not yet discovered how to measure them, as there was no mechanism to measure gravity before Isaac Newton. But critically, if we assume that consciousness being innate as well as undetectable, we can make an assumption about it that puts it in the same class as gravity and magnetism. Consciousness is a universal, fundamental truth to the universe. The assumption for a long time regarding consciousness is a very simple one. Complexity causes consciousness to arise in people. Consciousness is an experience that only complex organisms have. This is not a satisfying answer, though, because of many different questions that spring up, such as where is the line between conscious and not? Is it binary? If complexity is the only thing that causes consciousness, are computers conscious in some way? So to summarize, consciousness is not an emergent feature of complex organisms. It is a fundamental feature of the universe that complex organisms gain access to. The same way a large planet like Earth has gravity because of the laws of matter, a human has consciousness because of some hypothetical law of consciousness. Earth did not get gravity after becoming a big ball floating in space. It became a big ball floating in space because of gravity. To return to the idea of a brain scan is measuring the way the brain is reacting to certain stimuli. The brain is a machine that measures stimuli and creates outcomes. This stimuli measurement seems to be outside of the normal operations of matter. In other words, it is not a naturally occurring stimulus response. For example, if you're in a hot room, you might decide to leave. This is as opposed to a rock or a plant that would be unable to leave a hot room, even if the rock melts or the plant dies. So if a creature has some kind of stimulus response, we can take this as evidence of consciousness, since in ourselves, qualia arise due to stimulus response, such as the eye seeing redness when certain photons interact with it. Then Ralsei, who exhibits autonomy and has a stimulus response, experiences qualia and is conscious. And frankly, he shouldn't be so hard on himself. He's a sweet boy. He's a sweet little guy. Oh, okay, but wait a second. Before we get more into this, let's take a step back. If I'm saying this, that opens certain doors that the smart viewers have already caught on to. For instance, if consciousness doesn't arise from complexity and is in everything, then am I saying everything is conscious? Well, yes. What I'm advocating here is the notion of Panpsychism, popularized recently by Philip Goff in his book Galileo's Error. Panpsychism has been discussed by philosophers as far back as 1929, Thomas Nagel's eponymous essay, Panpsychism, and rejects a strictly physical idea of consciousness. Panpsychism is an interesting and growing field, including the recent Conscious book by Annika Harris. The essay Panpsychism by Nagel I find to be one of the most succinct on the topic, and lacks some of the mystery the more modern writers have. Here's a quote from the essay. Quote, "If the mental properties of an organism are not implied by any physical properties, but must derive from the properties of the organism's constituents, then those constituents must have non-physical properties from which the appearance of mental properties follows when the combination is of the right kind." End quote. In simpler terms, if consciousness cannot be found in an organism, it must be found elsewhere, like my previous remarks about gravity. But again, that opens certain implications that people may find uncomfortable. If everything is, or rather could be, conscious, then what does that say for vegetarians? Or what about ChatGPT? Is it true that AI is conscious like the tech bros said?
Could machines ever think as human beings do?
Most people say not.
You're not most people.
Of course, machines can't think as people do. A machine is different from a person. The interesting question is, just because something thinks differently from you, does that mean it's not thinking? No, we allow for humans to have such divergences from one another. What is the point of different tastes, different preferences, if not to say that our brains work differently, that we think differently? The imitation game.
Right, that's what it's about.
Would you like to play?
Play?
It's a game. A test of sorts. All you have to do is ask me a question.
One, the Turing test. Alan Turing's famous test. Currently, AI models are able to pass the Turing test, which doesn't imply that AI are extremely advanced, more like there is an incredibly low bar required to pass the test. Especially in a text-based format, a computer has been able to simulate conversation since Cleverbot from 2008, and even Jabberwocky from 1988. If we look at the Turing test not as a pass-fail metric, but as a sort of spectrum, We can see how there are some objects that more and less pass the Turing test. Let's say arbitrarily there are 5 levels. 0 is inert rock, and 5 is flesh and blood human. 0 is a rock, totally inert and inanimate. 1 is an air conditioner, which can make rudimentary choices, i.e., if it becomes too cold or hot, it will turn on. 2 is a non-complex organism that works entirely on stimuli, like a fly. 3 is a PC computer running a conversation bot program. 4 is a theoretical android replica of a human that is indistinguishable from a human. And 5 is a human being. You can see how, behaviorally speaking, in other words, on an observable level, Susie or Ralsei can simulate conversation by reacting to the player's dialogue choices. This is, we'll say, arbitrarily a level 2 consciousness that, with the suspension of disbelief, a human could get attached to and believe in. So, behaviorally speaking, Ralsei is real. 2. Seal's Chinese Room. The Chinese Room is a thought experiment meant to disprove the notion that a computer program is capable of consciousness. The thought experiment goes like this. If you're seated in a room and asked to translate a passage of Chinese text into English using a reference book, do you understand the Chinese language? The expected answer to the thought experiment is no, since when you do not have a reference book, you stop understanding Chinese. But there's a slight flaw with the thought experiment. My question is, at what point do you begin to understand Chinese? If, for example, this hypothetical translation task was your job that you did full-time for a year, you would likely leave the Chinese room knowing Chinese, or complete the task without the reference book. In other words, eventually, given enough time in the Chinese room, you would know Chinese. If we are to comprehend knowing Chinese as a direct metaphor for being conscious, then I do concede there is a difference between something that seems conscious and is conscious, but at the same time this is a spectrum in the same way I discussed in the Turing test example. In other words, in the Chinese room, you start out as not comprehending Chinese, but after sufficient study, complexity, or mastery, you would begin to know it. In this way, a computer could learn consciousness from its constituent parts, forming a decision-based machine responding to stimuli. To be clear, this doesn't imply that a computer has the same consciousness as a human and is not alive in the same fashion, just that this example doesn't disprove anything. 3. The combination problem. The combination problem is a problem faced by panpsychism as a whole. The basic form of the argument is as follows. Let's say 1 plus 2 is 3. 3, though its constituent parts are 1 and 2, is a new entity with a new identity and new abilities. In the same way, a human is a collection of many smaller cells, which all could have a consciousness as I've described it. They are alive in a similar way. In other words, why are we conscious as complex beings but our constituent parts are not? In the example of, say, Susie, Susie is made up of many ones and zeros. She is also made up of many in-game objects. In the Game Maker engine, an object is a packet of code, sometimes attached to a sprite, that controls how a game functions. Susie is made up of these processes, so why should the emergent idea of Susie have a unique consciousness outside of them? Moreover, Susie is part of a larger computer, and only exists as part of the computer, so why should she be unique? It's a similar problem. To the combination problem, I have 2 refutations. The first refutation in terms of premise. In other words, in a panpsychist view, there's no reason that your constituent parts are not conscious. The cells in my hand might have some kind of low-level consciousness themselves that I'm not aware of. There's no reason their and my consciousness shouldn't be discrete, because our behavior is able to be discrete. In other words, my, for example, liver is able to make choices that I'm not conscious of. I don't have to manually breathe, even though now you're manually breathing. The second refutation is in terms of observation. This is somewhat subjective and not scientific, but let's say we directly correlate consciousness with behavior. After all, this is how we assume other human beings and animals have consciousness. Why would this assumption stop at lower level intelligence or intelligence that doesn't come from life? 4. The AI problem or the privilege problem. Okay, because this is a current hot-button topic, I want to be clear about what I'm implying for generative AI like ChatGPT or other generative tools. I don't believe that AI, as they exist now, are somehow alive, even if they are in some fashion conscious. What I mean is, if you killed one, you would not be subject to the same moral quandaries as killing a human. An AI, especially a generative AI or chatbot, is conscious in that it may have experiences and make determinations based on stimuli or even experience qualia, but that doesn't mean they are somehow as privileged as a human in terms of consciousness and its implications. An AI experiences no pain when it is quote-unquote killed. So what I am categorically not arguing is chatbots being in the same moral system as a human being, which some tech bros have argued for. That's why I delineated between alive and conscious before.
He always spoke of men in the same old, indifferent way, just as one speaks of bricks and manure piles and such things. You could see that they were of no consequence to him, one way or the other. He didn't mean to hurt us, you could see that. Just as we don't mean to insult a brick when we disparage it. A brick's emotions are nothing to us. It never occurs to us to think whether it has any or not. Once, when he was bunching the most illustrious kings and conquerors and poets and prophets and pirates and beggars together, just a brick pile, I was shamed into putting in a word for man, and asked him why he made so much difference between men and himself. He had to struggle with that a moment. He didn't seem to understand how I could ask such a strange question. Then he said, "The difference between man and me. The difference between a mortal and an immortal, between a cloud and a spirit." He picked up a woodlouse that was creeping along a piece of bark. "What is the difference between Caesar and this?" I said, "One cannot compare things which by their nature and by the interval between them are not comparable." "You have answered your own question," he said.
Back to Ralsei. If we assume that Susie and Chris are, let's say, level 5 consciousnesses, we can assume that Ralsei, exhibiting the behaviors of a psychic being with stimulus response and reasoning skills, is also a level 5 consciousness, and just as alive as any other Lightner. Now, I've spent a long time explaining to you something that feels rather intuitive. When we see Ralsei's room and feel sad for him, this is because on an intuitive level we understand Ralsei as alive. If we didn't, how could we care about him at all? We would think that Chris and Susie are foolish for concerning themselves with an inanimate object. And that's clearly not what Toby Fox is trying to do. I've spent so long explaining this concept, even though we understand Ralsei as alive intuitively. It's vitally important to reinforce why they are alive. This is because I think that in the future chapters, this unreal aspect to Ralsei is going to be further challenged, maybe with Ralsei encouraging Susie, Chris, and the player to somehow dispose of them. And when that moment comes, the player needs to comprehend what they are doing. Ralsei might want to devalue himself, but it is of vital importance that he is respected as a living consciousness character in the game of Deltarune. At the most basic level, the game of Deltarune is asking a question. Does it matter how you treat inanimate objects? Though Ralsei says it doesn't, the game repeatedly and emphatically refutes this, from how Tenna is treated to the way the player instinctually rejects Ralsei's self-concept. But here's the thing. The game isn't just asking you to respect inanimate objects within the game world, is it? On November 22nd, 1995, the Pixar animation studio released Toy Story, a feature film about a group of toys who have secret lives when the boy who plays with them isn't looking. This harkens back to previous depictions of toys with internality, from the previous Disney animated features Winnie the Pooh to even older stories, such as Alice in Wonderland. Toy Story plays on the inherent human want for anthropomorphization, the tendency for people to see human-like features in animals, or even nature around them, a trend extending to old pagan religions and cults. Greek myth, Norse myth, even proto-Christian religion in the Levant, all personified the inanimate. In Toy Story, a character named Sid abuses toys and makes monstrous beings out of their parts. In the real world, we would understand Sid as an odd child, certainly not a villain, but in the narrative of Toy Story, Sid is absolutely maniacal. In the toys' presence, he is omnipotent. They are frozen under his gaze. He does not even understand they are living until the climax of the film. Sid exists in all of us, under the callous, destructive being that wants power over others, the root of all evil. Sid doesn't seem evil to us because he's just playing with toys. He doesn't know that inside the toys, there are friends. Part 2. Reality outside Deltarune. In our world, is Susie real? Okay, that's a stupid question. Fictional characters aren't real. There's a firm, solid line between fiction and reality. I'm real, you're real, and Susie isn't. She's no more real than Harry Potter or R2-D2 or Nuki from the 1987 South African film Nuki by C.S. Odendahl. I've discussed panpsychism extensively already, and I've dabbled in anthropomorphization, but I want to bring it all together here, because there is a vast difference between fiction and reality, but the difference is You've felt it, haven't you? The line fading away. Like the line between lanes on a road fading away with time. The line. You've seen the line. You used to cross the line all the time. You crossed it when you sat under your covers playing video games. You crossed it when you had to read books for class. You crossed it watching movies with your family. Then, when it was done, you crossed back and went to bed. But now the line is different. You're not always sure where the line is. You feel like you can't cross back over it again. It's as if someone erased it when you weren't looking. Once, a long, long time ago, you crossed the line to log into Facebook or Twitter or something awful. And before you knew it, the line was gone. You walked to school, or your job, or your house, not knowing if you were across the line or not, feeling the buzz of your phone in your pocket, the pull of the home PC, the allure of games on your iPad. Suddenly the men in your podcast felt like friends. The shows you watch felt like history books. And if someone wasn't inside your phone, they weren't real. And that was fine for a while in the world without the line. But the line isn't a line on the highway. The line is where air meets the water. And you've been drowning for years, haven't you? And all of a sudden, the people beneath the line started feeling fake. Like before, instead of faces, they were shadows. Dark, yet darker. As you sank deeper, the glow from your phone couldn't illuminate how deep you were. Suddenly, you're a character in a story. You're a fake person too. And when you see another face in the dark, you can't tell who it is. Is it you? Is it your girlfriend? Is it your best friend? Is it Steven from Steven Universe? Is it your boss? Is it Finn from Adventure Time? SpongeBob? Nuki from the hit 1987 South American film Nuki by C.S. Odendahl? Your mother? Your friend who you haven't spoken to in 5 years who just got married? Is the face a person? Is it a character? Are they real? Are they your friend, your foe? People wear the faces of anime characters, of cartoons, of actors playing characters, but even when someone is themselves, you don't know if it's them, or they're just wearing a face. Your ability to empathize was amputated. You lashed out because it was the last thing you felt excited by, and you forgot to care about anything. You're just one of a million in a world of masks. The line is gone. High above your head, maybe miles, maybe fathoms, and you're still sinking. But there's something else down there. Photon readings negative. The shadows on the wall are moving. And suddenly you catch a glimpse of it. A sparkle of feeling, a faint and beautiful moment of clarity through everything. Another line, far below you. It's so clear. It's so white and bright and pure, and it makes you realize what you were missing, doesn't it? Wouldn't you like to breathe for the first time in years? Is Susie real? Is Ralsei real? Is Nuki from the hit 1987 South African film Nuki by C.S. Odendahl real? Are you real?
Monsieur Valdemar, can you explain to us what are your feelings or wishes now? There was an instant return of the hectic circles on the cheeks. The tongue quivered, or rather rolled violently in the mouth, although the jaws and lips remained rigid as before. And at length the same hideous voice, which I have already described, broke forth. For God's sake, quick, quick, put me to sleep. Oh, quick, waken me. Quick. I say to you that I am dead. Dead. Dead.
Do you exist? When I say exist, this puts you on the same level as, say, Superman. Superman is a character, and you're at least a character in that you have traits and features, and people know who you're referring to when you say your names. You is real in that you are conceptual, which is self-evident and not interesting. Moving on. Are you alive? When I say alive, what do I mean? I don't mean alive in a formal biological sense, I mean alive in a more general sense. Are you animate? In other words, you can talk, run around, communicate, and have intelligence. If we assume that you, like other humans, are a being created from inanimate objects, or even possibly the remains of other monsters, the answer is that you are alive sometimes. For example, you can't remember what was going on before you were created. You actually can't remember being created at all. The idea of memory from that time is as blank as trying to see out of the back of your head. Your vision doesn't go that far. On top of that, for 8 hours a day, you're curled up in bed, completely blank. We'll call this your inert phase. But even if your ability to animate is conditional, that doesn't mean it devalues the moments you are animate. Even if it's an illusion, it's a very convincing one. In this way, I think you're being unfair to yourself. You are alive. Even if it's not all the time, you're a real person with feelings and dreams. I do think if we accept you are alive, this invites some new complications. Are you conscious? Are you? I can't answer that for you. Anything whatever, if broken down far enough and rearranged, could be incorporated into a living organism. No constituents, besides matter, are needed. Ordinary mental states, like thought, feeling, emotion, sensation, or desire, are not physical properties of the organism, behavioral, physiological, or otherwise, and they are not implied by physical properties alone. There are no truly emergent properties of complex systems. And yet, I mean, being conscious could be the only thing you can scientifically prove. Every other proof has to come back to some kind of experiential phenomena. To prove Jupiter exists, you have to see it with a telescope. To prove the curve of the Earth exists, you have to do an experiment that demonstrates it. Even if the world isn't real, and we all live in a simulation, well, your consciousness is still real, isn't it? Because, by nature of existing, and thinking, and feeling, it must be real. If it's not real, well, you couldn't exist. And you do. Right? You're real. Susie is real. Ralsei is real. Okay, wait a second. What is the suspension of disbelief? Eventually, you have to meet the characters of a fictional work halfway. Usually that means making the characters more real, giving them internal lives that don't exist in the pages of books or the lines of code in a game. But what if meeting them halfway doesn't just mean making characters more complex? It meant making ourselves more flat. What the hell does it mean to be real or to be conscious? Nothing. It's meaningless. I've been attacking your brain for the last period of time with ego-killing cliches and brain paradox sludge to try to bog you down on purpose, because I hate you. I hate being alive, I hate having a body, and it makes me so mad, which is an emotion I have to feel because I have a body to feel it in. I'm sorry, that was mean. You're real, aren't you? You're not a philosophical zombie, you're a real, contiguous consciousness that's going to heaven when you die, and so am I if I accept Christ. Or maybe I'm not real. I'm the consciousness zombie, and you're the only real person in the entire world. Maybe. It's possible. Isn't that scary? If you can't prove anything is conscious, you can't prove you're not completely, crushingly alone. Maybe you're the first ever truly conscious being ever. And maybe when you die, nobody will ever be conscious again. What is the suspension of disbelief? Eventually, you have to meet people halfway. Usually that means making them more real, giving them internal lives that don't exist on Facebook posts or Twitter DMs. But what if meeting them halfway doesn't just mean making people more complex, it meant making ourselves more flat? Are you real? Is Ralsei real? In what way are these questions actually different? I know one thing. I know that you don't want to feel pain or be killed. Even if he doesn't exist. Does Ralsei? Part 3, Toy Story 4. In Toy Story 4, there's a character named Forky. Forky is made by a little girl named Bonnie and comes to life because Bonnie sees Forky, a spork with googly eyes and malformed pipe cleaner hands, as a toy. This indicates for the first time in the series where we see this transient moment, the moment where an inanimate thing becomes real or conscious. Forky experiences an existential dread at his new existence, insisting that he is not a toy, trying to throw himself away, but he can't control his nature. He, once inert constituent parts, is now in the fiction a real, living entity. He exists because Bonnie breathed life into him. In 1995, Toy Story was an interesting film. The idea of a toy was something that seemed ubiquitous in culture, something that children wanted and were subject to fads and advertising. The entire 1980s were filled with cartoons that were almost entirely toy commercials. Even so, in 2025, 30 years later, inexplicably the idea of a toy seems almost quaint. Young children occupy themselves with video games on iPads. Legos, once a staple toy for children, are now actively marketing to an adult audience. Which is why Toy Story 4 manages to remain so interesting. It reframes the entire idea of a toy. A toy is no longer an inanimate object brought to life due to a child's playtime, but an inanimate object brought to life by the act of creation, of art. Bonnie brings Forky into existence by simple, even naive creativity. She isn't just making a toy, she is clumsily committing her first stumbling act of creation, an act that is quite literally brought to life. The video games that have replaced toys, both as products in stores and as art made by others, meant to be enjoyed by the masses. Remember the line? The line is just beyond here now, just a little more. Video games, like toys, also require iterative play. Just like toys inspire storytelling by mashing action figures together, video games inspire storytelling too, inside the games as explicit narratives or online as discussions and fan theories. And in a world where the line no longer exists, the fan theories and the discussions are the same thing in the game itself. In Undertale, if you complete the pacifist ending, Flowey will beg you to leave the world of the game alone. Why? It's just a game, isn't it? A piece of computer software, where the characters don't continue to exist after you've stopped watching them. Right? They aren't real, right? You don't need to have empathy for them. Do you? But when you're fighting Undyne the Undying in the genocide run, it hurts. When you see a video of Toriel being killed after her mercy condition is met, you wince in sympathetic pain. If these characters are not real, why is there that twinge of sadness? The qualia in your mind are real, but these characters aren't. Are they? For the first time in years, you feel your head bursting above the water. You breathe fresh, salty air and blink in the sunshine. You've crossed back over the line. You look back down and realize the depths were only feet deep. You could have stood up at any time. You reach down into the puddle and pick up a soggy Ralsei plush doll, valued at $36 MSRP. When you look away, it comes to life. Under the depths that seem deeper when you're under them, Ralsei is real. He smiles. He dances. He plays with his ears. But he doesn't live in the plush toy. He doesn't live in Deltarune. The friend lives inside you. All right. I'm going back to bed. Thanks.